thanks for joining us today for another Trading Constellations short story. This one is titled The Lantern Left Behind. Voicemail 1. I don't know where you went. I'm at the spot. The water's higher than last time. Please call me before dark. Listening felt familiar, but she wasn't anyone he'd ever met. Alex had had this number for 3 days. He was still getting junk calls for the old owner, banks, spam, a dentist named Glenn. But this message didn't sound like a wrong number or a bill collector. It sounded like someone standing alone in the cold, waiting. He deleted it, but it stayed with him. The water was higher than last time. Voicemail 2. It's getting late. You should have met me by now. I'm trying to be patient, but I need to know you're safe. That one landed 2 days later. He finally texted the number. Wrong number. New phone owner. Simple, practical, done. Voicemail 3. She called anyway. I got your text. I know you're not him. But if this is the number he left behind, maybe you can pass a message on if he ever surfaces. Tell him the lantern went out, and I won't be going back there. Not again. She sighed, tired, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Thank you for answering, I guess. Alex didn't text this time. He just listened twice. Voicemail 4. If you're still receiving these, this is the last one. I'm letting go. Tell him, if he somehow hears this, that I kept my promise as long as I could. And I hope he kept his. Goodbye. And that was it. No more calls. Just silence and a number that suddenly felt older than his phone, older than him, like it belonged to someone who'd already left the map. In his head, he thought, yeah, the whole thing felt like he had inherited a ghost. Cryptic, emotional, and somehow more honest than half the calls people actually meant to answer. She had always been a woman defined by edges and thresholds. The place she spoke of in her voicemails, a riverbank that rose unpredictably, a spot marked by memory and maybe grief, was not merely geography. It was a ledger of promises made in another time, under another version of herself, to someone who had disappeared into the kind of silence that cannot be chased. She carried her history in her posture, in the way her voice trembled just enough to betray patience stretched thin. Her life had been measured in absences, of people, of hope, of answers. The lantern she mentioned wasn't just a literal object. It was the marker of a vigil she had kept alone, in rain, wind, and the quiet cold that makes waiting a full-time occupation. Each message was a fragment of ritual, a ritual to honor a pact only she remembered in full. Yet even as she spoke to a number that no longer belonged to him, she allowed the possibility of contact, the faint flicker of acknowledgement, to ease the weight on her chest. In the end, she was both tethered and untethered, a woman who had loved, lost, and learned the necessary alchemy of letting go. The goodbye in her final message wasn't only for him, it was for herself. A concession to a life that demanded she release what she could not control and carry forward what she could still claim. Her own courage, her own quiet insistence that promises, even when unfulfilled, still mattered. Her story lingered in the spaces between the beeps, in the silence left behind, a ghost that had finally chosen to step off the map. She had been called Mara, though that was only one of several names she had answered to over the years, each tied to a life she had tried and failed to disentangle from the last. She was the sort of woman who remembered everything about people who had long forgotten her, small details like the crease of a coat, the way someone laughed while staring at the sky, the precise angle a lantern flickered when the wind struck. Her memory was both gift and curse, and it was the curse that drove her to the riverbank, standing in cold water that threatened to pull at her boots, hoping against hope that he would appear. The man she sought was Elias, or Eli, as she had once called him, in the intimacy of shared rooms and stolen afternoons. They had met in youth, when the world was wide and promises felt unbreakable. But life had a way of fracturing even the most certain bonds. He had vanished one winter, leaving only a hastily scrawled note that spoke of debts, of danger, of needing to disappear. Mara never knew what exactly had driven him away, whether it was trouble he had invited upon himself or a choice meant to protect her. The river, the lantern, the messages, they were all markers in a geography of absence she could never map for anyone else. In a call that winter, Mara didn't know it would be the last time she would speak to Eli. If she had, maybe she would have tried to sound steadier, or at least less like someone talking through a storm they pretended wasn't happening. Eli answered with that half-laugh he always used when he was exhausted, but didn't want to show it. Mara told him she was fine. Eli told her he was getting there. Neither of them meant what they said. They circled the real subject the way birds circle a burned field, close enough to see the damage, never close enough to land. Mara asked if Eli was still clean. He changed the topic. Eli asked if Mara was still waiting. Mara said yes, but only this last time. It felt like trading constellations they both knew by heart and pretending they didn't recognize the shapes. When the call started dropping, Mara thought it was just the bad reception again. But Eli hesitated in a way that felt intentional, like he was letting the distance do the talking for him. He said, "If I don't call for a while, just know it isn't you." Mara wanted to ask what that meant. She wanted to ask where Eli was. She wanted to ask if he was scared. But the line went hollow. And then it was just Mara listening to the kind of silence that feels like a closed door. Looking back, it felt like one of those conversations where the goodbye is hidden between the lines, and you only hear it once you're far enough away to admit it was was there the whole time. She called the old number repeatedly because it was the only thread she had left. Each voicemail was both a beacon and a confession, a tether to a man who might never return. She spoke in riddles because direct words would have betrayed her fear. The precariousness of hope she carried like a fragile flame. The lantern she mentioned had once been their signal, left lit at a bend in the river to mark safety, to mark time, to mark a life they might have shared. Now, extinguished, it symbolized the impossibility of their reunion. Yet she could not help but speak into the void, letting sound carry what her heart still demanded. That he know she had not abandoned him, that she had kept her side of promises he might not have been able to honor. Mara's story was one of devotion edged with tragedy, of a woman who had loved fully, recklessly, and yet with a discipline born from necessity. Her voicemails, heard by a stranger, were relics of a life she had lived for someone else, echoes of a past that refused to fade, and the riverbank was her altar, her confession booth, and her final witness